The first thing the spore lords of the Carrion Bloom did, when they found the human ship, was laugh. It was not a sound the way humans make sound. The Bloom did not have throats. They spoke by releasing clouds of fine spores that carried meaning the way smell carries memory. And when their fleet mind found the small gray vessel drifting at the edge of the Sevrek Verge, it released a cloud of pure contempt that drifted across 40 warships at once. Every navigator in the swarm tasted the same joke. Look at it. Look at the shape of it. The humans had sent a tug. The ship was called the Plain Hannah, and from the outside, it looked like exactly what the Bloom believed it to be. It was 400 meters of dull gray hull, with no clean lines anywhere. It had a fat, blunt nose, a spine that sagged in the middle, like an old mule, and a cargo collar around its waist, where freighters clamped their containers. Its paint was scuffed down to bare metal in 100 places. One of its running lights blinked when it should have been steady, and had blinked that way for 9 years. Nothing about it said warship. Everything about it said hauler, the kind of ship that moved ore between rocks and never went anywhere worth a name. A man named Otto Pell was the reason that light still blinked, and the reason he had stopped trying to fix it. Otto was the chief deck engineer of the Plain Hannah, and he was 51 years old, and he had been fixing the same ship for 22 of those years. He was a wide man with grease under every fingernail and a way of standing that made him look like part of the ship's structure. He did not give speeches. He did not salute well. When officers from the fleet came aboard for inspection, they tended to mistake him for maintenance staff, which he was, and walk past him to find someone more important, of which there were none. Otto liked it that way. There was a story about Otto that the younger crew told each other on the long, quiet watches, the way crews always make legends out of the people they live beside. The story went that when Otto Pell first came aboard the Plain Hannah, 22 years gone, he had taken one walk down her spine, from the blunt nose to the drive cones, and at the end of it, he had set down his tool bag and said, to no one in particular, that this was the most dishonest ship he had ever seen, and he was going to die on her. People had laughed. Otto had not. He had meant it as the highest praise a man could give a machine, and over the years the rest of them had come, slowly, to understand why. He had served on bright ships before this one. He did not talk about them much. There had been a cruiser called the Steadfast Aurora, all clean lines and big painted numbers, that an enemy had read at a glance from a long way off and killed before it ever closed, because everything about it announced exactly how dangerous it was and exactly how to deal with it. Otto had been in the engine spaces when the Aurora came apart. He had walked away from that, one of the few, and he had carried out of it a single hard idea that shaped the rest of his life. A weapon you can see is a weapon you can plan around. The deadliest thing in any room is the thing nobody is watching. He had asked for the Plain Hannah the moment he heard what she truly was, the same way Iris Vane had. Two people drawn to the same ugly secret for the same private reason. He was in the number 2 pump bay, elbow deep in a coolant manifold that had no business being open, when the Bloom's contempt cloud washed across the long-range sensors and the bridge called down to tell him the galaxy had finally arrived. Otto. The voice belonged to Captain Iris Vane, and it was very calm, which meant it was very bad. We have company. 40 hulls, give or take. They're laughing at us. Otto wiped his hands on a rag that made them dirtier. Laughing how? Spore talk. Long range picked up a chemical broadcast. The computer translated about a third of it before it gave up. The polite part says we're a tug. A pause. The rest is not polite. Otto looked at the open manifold. He looked at the wrench in his hand. He had a decision to make, the same decision he had made every day for 22 years, and he made it the same way. He closed the manifold. He sealed it slow. He did not rush, because the plain Hannah did not reward rushing, and because the men who rushed on this ship were the men who got fingers caught in things that closed. "Tell them we're a tug," Otto said. "Tell them we agree." The bridge was quiet a moment. Then Iris Vane laughed, just once, low, and Otto could hear in it that she understood exactly what he meant. Because the plain Hannah was not a tug. The plain Hannah was the single ugliest, most insulting secret the human navy had ever built, and Otto Pell knew every centimeter of the lie. Otto could have drawn the lie from memory, blindfolded, with both hands tied. He had spent more hours inside the plain Hannah than he had spent anywhere else in his life, including asleep, including alive before he ever boarded her. He knew where every weapon hid, and what every false panel covered, and which sounds the ship made when she was happy, and which sounds meant trouble 3 days out. He knew her the way a man knows the body he has lived in for 50 years, which is to say completely, and without ever once thinking of it as remarkable. She had been laid down 40 years earlier under a program that had no name on paper, only a budget line marked maintenance vessel, heavy. The whole point of her was that she would be underestimated, so the engineers who built her had done something no navy in the galaxy had ever been stupid enough to do on purpose. They had made a warship that looked like garbage. They had taken the deadliest weapons humanity owned and buried them inside the body of a ship that begged to be ignored. The sagging spine hid a spinal accelerator that ran the full length of the hull. The fat blunt nose was a sensor and targeting cluster wrapped in cheap plating. The cargo collar around her waist was not for cargo. It was the mounting ring for 60 missile cells, folded flat against the hull and painted to look like rust. And the blinking light. Otto had figured out years ago what the blinking light actually was. It was a tell. Some long-dead engineer had wired a status indicator from the main reactor into the running light circuit, so that anyone who knew the ship could read her readiness at a glance from outside, in a code no enemy would ever bother to learn. Steady light, reactor cold. Blinking light, reactor warm. The plain Hannah had been quietly warm for 9 years, sitting at the edge of human space, waiting, looking broken. Otto had stopped fixing the blink, because the blink was the truth. That was the thing about the plain Hannah that Otto loved most, the thing that no inspector ever saw and no enemy ever guessed, until it was far too late. She did not have a single lie on her that was wasteful. Every part of her disguise did double duty. The sagging spine that made her look like a tired old hauler was the housing for her main gun. The cargo collar that made her look like a freight ship was her missile rack. The scuffed paint that made her look neglected was carefully applied to break up the clean lines that would have given her away on a long-range scan. And the blinking light, the broken running light that any decent mechanic would have fixed in an afternoon, was the readiness telltale of a capital ship reactor, hidden in plain sight as the one flaw nobody would look at twice. The whole ship was like that. She was a lie told by people who understood that the best lie is the one that is also useful, the one that does real work while you are not looking at it. Otto had spent his life around honest machines, machines that showed you what they were, and he had come to think of them, a little, as simple. The plain Hannah was not simple. The plain Hannah was the cleverest thing he had ever touched, and the cleverness was all the deeper for being invisible. And he had never stopped, in 22 years, being a little in awe of the long-dead engineers who had built a ship whose greatest weapon was the certainty of everyone who looked at her. He pulled himself out of the pump bay and went down the spine toward the heart of the ship, past crew who were already moving, already quiet, already wearing the faces of people who had drilled this exact morning 400 times and had never once believed it would come. The plain Hannah carried a crew of 210. Most of them were young. Most of them had joined the Navy hoping for a real ship, a bright ship, a ship with a number painted big on the side and had been disappointed to be assigned to the joke that hauled itself around the verge. Otto had watched the disappointment land on a dozen classes of recruits. He had also watched it turn, slowly, over months, into something else. Pride of a strange and private kind. The pride of people who know a secret about themselves that no one else believes. He passed a young deckhand named Corey Tan, 19 years old, frozen halfway through sealing his suit, his face the color of the gray hull. Corey had joined 4 months ago, fresh out of training, certain he had been assigned to the plane Hannah as a punishment for something, though he had never figured out what. Otto had watched 100 Corey Tans come aboard. He stopped, even now, even with 40 warships closing in, because that was the kind of thing that mattered more than minutes. Suit first, Otto said. Seal it slow. You rush the seal, you get a gap, and on this ship, a gap is the only thing that can kill you today. Understand? Corey nodded, not understanding, sealing slow. You know what we are, Otto said. You've heard. You didn't believe it. That's fine. Nobody believes it. He clapped the boy once on the shoulder, hard enough to feel through the suit. You're about to. Stay at your station. Do your job. And when this is over, you're going to spend the rest of your life knowing a thing the whole galaxy got wrong. That's worth more than a bright ship, son. You'll see. He left the boy standing a little straighter, and went on. He reached the central well and looked up the spine of the ship, the long sagging line of her, and for 1 second, he let himself feel it. 40 warships. The Carrion Bloom. He had read the files on them, the few files anyone had. They were a plague that wore other people's fleets. They did not build ships. They grew into them. A bloom swarm would drift up to a vessel, latch on with spore roots, and over the course of a day or two, it would seep through the hull and eat the crew from the inside, replacing flesh with fungal cord, until the ship flew on, looking exactly the same, crewed entirely by the thing that had killed it. They had done this to 9 civilizations that anyone could count. They had a fleet now of 40 hulls, and not one of those hulls had started out as theirs. Every ship in that swarm was a graveyard with engines. There was a reason the plane Hannah sat alone at the edge of the Sevrek Verge, and the reason was not an accident. The verge was where the Carrion Bloom was most likely to come. Human intelligence had spent years tracking the slow drift of the swarm across the dark, the long patient migration of a plague between feeding grounds, and they had charted its path the way a farmer charts the seasons. The bloom was coming this way. It had been coming this way for a decade, and so the Navy had taken its ugliest, most insulting secret and parked it directly in the swarm's path. A single small gray ship sitting in the empty dark, looking broken, looking abandoned, looking exactly like the kind of stray hull a plague loves to find. The plane Hannah was not patrolling the verge. The plane Hannah was bait, and she had been bait for 9 years, and Otto Pell had spent those 9 years keeping the bait warm. That was the part the galaxy would never understand, even after. The trap had not been sprung this morning. The trap had been set 9 years ago, and every day since, 210 people had lived inside it, drilling and waiting, and keeping a reactor warm, and letting a light blink, for the single morning when the oldest fear in the galaxy would finally drift up to the small gray ship and decide it had found an easy meal. That was why they were laughing. They thought they had found number 41. Otto Pell touched the cold metal of the central well and did not laugh back. He simply began to climb toward the bridge, slow and steady, the way he did everything, while above him the Carrion Bloom drifted closer to the tug it had already named in its memory, the small dead thing it had already begun to taste. They would learn the difference soon enough. Otto intended to teach it personally. The bridge of the plane Hannah looked as poor as the rest of her. The consoles were old, the chairs were patched, and one of the overhead panels had been held shut with a strip of tape for so long that the tape had a name. The crew called it Gerald. Nobody remembered why. Captain Iris Vane sat in the center of all of it, in a chair that had been restitched 4 times, and she watched the swarm come. She was a small woman, with gray at her temples, and a stillness about her that made loud men nervous. She had commanded 3 real warships in her career, bright ones, fast ones, and then she had asked, of her own choosing, for this one. People had thought she was being punished. She had let them think it. The truth was, she had read the maintenance vessel, heavy file once, late at night, with a glass of something cheap in her hand, and she had understood what the plain Hannah really was, and she had decided that she wanted to be the one sitting in this restitched chair on the day the galaxy made the mistake. That day was here. "Bring me the picture," she said. The main display cleared and showed the swarm. 40 hulls, drifting in the loose clotted formation the Bloom liked. No 2 of them alike. They were a museum of dead navies. Otto, arriving at the back of the bridge, recognized half of them on sight. There was a Tesseract cruiser, all silver fins, that had gone missing 11 years ago, with 900 souls aboard. There was a Holvith dreadnought, a slab of a thing, that the Holvith had publicly mourned and built a monument to. There was a Sevic courier, fast and elegant, with the Sevic royal crest still painted on its flank, flying now as a scout for the thing that had eaten the prince inside it. The Bloom did not even repaint its trophies. It wanted them to be recognized. The recognition was part of the meal. Every fleet that saw the swarm coming knew it was looking at its own future. And across the front of the swarm, in the largest hull, the seed ship of the whole Bloom, the fleet mind that the others orbited like moons. It had once been a colony transport. It was 3 kilometers long, and it bled spores from 1,000 vents, a slow, constant exhalation, and the readings off it made the sensor crew go pale. It was not a ship anymore. It was a single living organism the size of a city, and the 39 warships around it were its hands. Iris had read everything there was to read about the Carrion Bloom, which was not much, because so few who met it lived to write anything down. What did exist was mostly second-hand, the panicked final transmissions of dying fleets, pieced together by analysts who had never seen the thing themselves. From those scraps a picture emerged, and the picture was the worst kind of enemy, because it was an enemy that could not be frightened, bargained with, or hurried. The Bloom did not value its own ships. Why would it? They were not its ships. They were trophies, tools, dead hulls it wore like a man wears boots, and it spent them without a flicker of concern. You could not deter a thing that did not fear loss. You could not bluff a thing that did not gamble. You could only kill it, all of it, every last spore, because anything you left behind would simply grow back, patient and certain, and come for you again, in a season or a century. Iris had built her whole plan around that one fact. The Bloom would not retreat, because retreat was not in its nature. It would commit. It would spread. It would do the thing it had done 9 times before, and the only question that mattered was whether the plain Hannah could wait long enough, lie still long enough, look harmless long enough, for the spreading to be complete before the truth came out. "It's hailing us," the comms officer said. His name was Park. He was 24, and his voice was very steady, because he was concentrating very hard on it being steady. Chemical broadcast translated to text. "Captain, you should see it. Read it to me," Iris said. "Out loud, let the bridge hear." Park swallowed. Then he read. "Small dead thing, we name you. You are a hauler, a beast of burden, a slow, soft animal that carries other people's loads and has never carried a weapon in your life. We have eaten warships, We have eaten kings. We will not waste a single warrior on you. We will simply drift up alongside you and put our roots through your hull, and in 2 days you will fly with us, and the men inside you will become part of the song, and you will never even have known you were in a battle, because a tug does not get a battle. A tug gets harvested. Lie still. It is easier if you lie still. The bridge was silent. Then Otto Pell from the back said, "Huh," and a few people laughed, because it was exactly the wrong thing to say, and exactly the right one, and the laugh broke the fear into pieces small enough to swallow. It was a small thing, that laugh, but it was the kind of small thing that wins battles before they start. The Bloom had just told 210 people that they were not even worth fighting, that they were cattle, that they would be harvested without the dignity of a struggle. Any other crew, on any other ship, might have heard that, and felt the cold certainty of the thing settle into their bones. But the crew of the plane Hannah had spent years being told, in one way or another, that they did not matter. The Navy had told them with their assignment. The bright ships had told them with their inspectors, who walked past Otto without seeing him. The whole galaxy had told them, by mistaking their ship for a tug. They were used to being underestimated. They had built a private pride out of it. And so when the oldest fear in the galaxy added its voice to the chorus and called them cattle, the crew of the plane Hannah did not feel afraid. They felt, almost, at home. Iris did not laugh. She looked at the message on the screen for a long moment. Then she said, very mildly, "Park, send them this. Spell it the way I say it." She thought, "Send them. We agree. We are a tug. Please come close." Park stared at her. "All of it," Iris said. "Please come close. Be polite. Add a please." Park sent it. The reply came back fast, faster than light has any business coming, because the Bloom did not use machines to think, it used itself, and the seed ship's amusement rolled across the gap as a cloud so thick the sensors registered it as a physical mass. The translation was 4 words. "Good. Lie still, tug." And the swarm began to spread. In the missile collar control room, a loading chief named Bria Holt watched the swarm spread on her own repeater and felt her stomach turn over, not from fear of dying, but from something closer to the opposite. She had run the loading crews on the plane Hannah for 11 years. She had drilled them so many times that her people could peel the false rust panels and bring the cells to ready in the dark, in vacuum, half asleep, and in all those 11 years, she had never once fired a missile at anything but a target drone. Now there were 40 real hulls spreading out across her screen, 40 dead navies wearing the skins of murdered ships, and every instinct she had screamed at her that this was wrong, that no one fanned out a whole fleet to take a single small ship, that the Bloom was making a mistake so large it had to be a trap of its own. It was not a trap, it was just certainty. Bria did not understand yet that certainty was the only weapon the plane Hannah needed the Bloom to bring. This was the thing about the Carrion Bloom that no fleet ever survived to write down properly. They did not charge. They did not form a line. A plague does not attack. A plague surrounds. The 40 hulls fanned out wide and slow, drifting apart from one another, opening up into a great loose net of dead ships that would close around the plane Hannah from every side at once. Some went high, some went low, some swung wide to come around behind. They were in no hurry. The tug was not going anywhere. By the time they were done, the small gray ship would be at the center of a sphere of 40 graves, with nowhere to run and nothing to run with, and then the roots would come. Otto watched the swarm spread, and he understood that the Bloom had just made the only mistake that mattered. He had spent 22 years inside this ship. He knew her one secret weakness, the thing the engineers had traded away to make her deadly. The plane Hannah could not fight everything in front of her. Her spinal accelerator fired one direction only, straight down the line of that sagging spine. Her missile collar could throw in a wide arc, but it took time to reload, real time, minutes. If 40 ships had come at her in a tight fist from one direction, she would have had a hard fight. She was strong, but she was one ship, and even a buried god has only so many hands. But the bloom had not come in a fist. The bloom had spread out. The bloom, certain it was harvesting a corpse, had carefully arranged its 40 warships into a thin shell, with huge gaps between each hull. Every ship isolated, every ship alone, no two close enough to cover each other. They had turned a fleet into 40 separate targets and spaced them out like a man laying place settings for a feast. They had set the table for their own funeral and called it a harvest. "Captain," Otto said. He did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. "They're spreading." "I see it, Otto. They're spreading wide." "I see that too." And there was something in Iris Vane's voice now, something Otto had heard exactly twice before in 22 years, both times right before the plane Hannah did something that should have been impossible. "Otto, go light her up. All of her. Quiet as you can. I want to be hot before they finish their net." Otto was already moving. He went down the spine at the only pace the plane Hannah allowed, which was unhurried, because this ship had been built by people who knew that panic kills more crews than any enemy. He passed the missile collar control room, where the loading crews were peeling back the false rust panels by hand, exposing the 60 cells underneath, each one painted on the outside to look like corrosion, and on the inside, packed with a warhead that could open a dreadnought like a tin of fish. He passed the accelerator gallery, the long armored tube that ran the length of the sagging spine, where 2 engineers were spinning up the magnetic coils so slowly and so gently that the only sign of it was a low hum you felt in your teeth more than heard. He passed the reactor. He stopped at the reactor. The reactor of the plane Hannah was the real heart of the lie. It was twice the size that a ship her apparent class would ever need, because she was not her apparent class, and for 9 years it had been kept at a low, warm idle, just enough to make the running light blink, never enough to show on a passive scan as anything but a freighter's lazy plant. Bringing it to full power was the single moment in the whole charade when the plane Hannah stopped looking like a tug. The energy signature would bloom across every sensor in the swarm. The lie would end. From the instant Otto pushed the reactor to combat output, the carrion bloom would know exactly what it had drifted up next to. The trick, the whole trick, was to do it late. To do it so late that the swarm was already spread thin and committed, already strung out in its loose harvesting net, already too far apart to pull back into a fist. To make the galaxy learn the truth at the exact moment it could no longer do anything about it. He stood in front of the reactor for a moment and thought about all the times he had stood there before. 10,000 drills. 10,000 times easing the lever up to combat output and then back down again, watching the great heart of the ship swell and settle, while a part of him wondered, every single time, whether the day would ever come when it was not a drill. He had begun to believe it would not. Most of the crew had. There is a thing that happens to people who train for a disaster that never arrives, a slow softening of belief, until the drill becomes a ritual with no meaning behind it, a thing you do because you have always done it. Otto had felt that softening in himself over the years. He had fought it the only way he knew how, by treating every drill as if it were the morning, because a man who treats the drill as real is the only man ready when the real thing finally comes. It had finally come, and Otto Pell, who had refused for 22 years to stop believing, found that his hands were perfectly steady. Otto put his hand on the reactor's main lever. It was worn smooth from his own palm over 22 years of testing, easing it up and easing it back, again and again, drilling for a morning he had never believed would come. He looked at the lever. He looked at the blinking light repeater on the wall, the small dim bulb that had blinked steady warm for 9 years. "Sorry, old girl," he said to the ship, quietly, the way you apologize to a horse before you ask it to run. "No more pretending." He waited. He watched the tactical repeater on the wall, the same picture the bridge had, 40 hulls drifting wider and wider, the net opening, the gaps growing. He waited for the word. She had thought about this morning for 9 years. Not in fear, and not in eagerness either, but in the slow, careful way an engineer thinks about a bridge that must hold a weight it has never yet been asked to hold. She had walked the whole thing through in her mind 10,000 times. The approach, the contempt cloud, the spread, the moment of the reveal, which was the hinge of everything, the single moment that had to be timed to the second. Too early, and the bloom would pull back into a fist while it still could, and the plain Hannah would face 40 hulls in a coordinated charge instead of 40 isolated targets. A fight she could win, but only at a price. Too late, and the roots would already be in the hull, and the morning would end very differently. The whole victory lived in a window perhaps 15 seconds wide, and Iris Vane had spent 9 years learning to find it. On the bridge, Iris Vane watched the same picture and counted in her head. She was waiting for a specific moment, not the moment the swarm was widest, the moment the swarm was committed. There is a point in any encirclement where the ships have spread so far that turning back would take longer than the kill, where every hull is leaning outward into its place in the net, and none of them can change its mind in time. A predator that surrounds its prey makes itself vulnerable for exactly as long as the circle is open. The bloom had done this 9 times, and survived 9 times, because 9 times the prey had been what the bloom believed it to be. 9 times the thing in the center had been a real tug, a real king, a real fleet of frightened animals. This was the 10th time, and the thing in the center had a spinal accelerator the length of its keel, and a man named Otto Pell with his hand on the lever. "Comms," Iris said softly. "One more message, send it just before we go hot. I want them reading it when the lights come on." She told Park the words. Park's hands shook a little as he cued it, not from fear now, from something closer to joy. The swarm reached its widest spread. The seed ship, 3 kilometers of breathing rot at the front, sent one final cloud, lazy and satisfied, a single word the translator rendered as now, and the nearest hulls, a dead Tesseract cruiser and the elegant Sevic courier, with its murdered prince's crest, began to drift in toward the small gray ship to put their roots through its hull. Iris Vane keyed the all-ship channel. Her voice went into every compartment of the plain Hannah at once, into the missile rooms and the accelerator gallery, and the pump bays, and the reactor where Otto stood with his hand on the worn lever. "This is the captain," she said. "They think we're a tug. For 22 years, so did the galaxy. They spread their whole fleet thin to harvest a corpse, and they put themselves exactly where we want them. We are not going to win this fight, because there is no fight. There is only us, and a lot of targets that don't know they're targets yet." A breath. "Park, send the message. Otto, light her up." In the comms room, Park sent the last words across the gap, into the spore cloud, into the mind of the thing that had named the plain Hannah a beast of burden. The message was 3 words. "We carry warheads." And Otto Pell pushed the lever all the way up. The reactor of the plain Hannah came awake, the way a mountain wakes, slow and total, and unstoppable, and across the Severick verge every sensor in 40 dead warships screamed at once. The energy that bloomed out of the little gray tug was not a freighter's plant. It was a capital ship reactor at full combat output, a signature so large and so violent that the seed ship, 3 kilometers of certainty, registered it as a second star being born inside its harvest net. The blinking running light on the plane Hannah's hull, the one Otto had let blink for 9 years, stopped blinking. It went hard, bright, steady, burning white. Reactor hot. The lie was over. The truth took 11 seconds to cross the gap, and the truth was this. The carrion bloom had spread its entire fleet into a thin shell around a fully powered human warship, and now it was the one at the center, and the human ship had the high ground in every direction at once. Otto felt the whole spine of the ship shiver as the accelerator coils, no longer humming gently, surged to full charge. He felt the missile collar lock open under his feet. He felt the plane Hannah, his plane Hannah, the joke, the burden, the tug, come fully and finally awake for the first time in 9 patient years, and he put a hand flat against her warm metal hull, the way a man steadies a horse at the gate. "There she is," he said. "Go get them, old girl." On the bridge, Iris Vane watched the swarm understand. She watched the loose net of 40 hulls begin, far too slowly to react. The nearest ships tried to pull their roots back. The wide ships tried to close the gaps. The seed ship released a cloud the translator could not even render, a smell of pure animal panic, the first fear the carrion bloom had tasted in 9 fleets. It was 11 seconds too late. "Gunnery," Iris said. "Targets are spread, isolated, and not a single one of them is in cover, because they put themselves there. Spinal accelerator, lead with the Holveth dreadnought. It's the only thing out there with armor worth the name. Missile collar, fire for effect on the wide hulls. They're alone, and they know it now. We are going to take this fleet apart, one place setting at a time." She leaned forward in her re-stitched chair. "And we are going to do it slow enough that they have time to understand what's happening to them. Open fire." The first thing the plane Hannah did was aim her sagging, mule-backed spine straight down the length of the Holveth dreadnought, the slab of armor that had been mourned and monumented, and fire. The spinal accelerator of the plane Hannah had no flash and no roar. It threw a single slug of dense metal down the full length of the ship's keel, at a speed the eye could not hope to follow, and the only sound aboard was a deep dropping thud you felt in the soles of your boots, like the ship had taken a single great step forward. Otto felt it from the reactor room. He had felt it 10,000 times in tests, firing into empty space, into target drones, into nothing. He had never once felt it hit something that mattered. It hit the Holveth dreadnought dead amidships. The dreadnought was the heaviest hull in the swarm, a slab of layered armor that the Holveth Navy had built to survive anything, and that the bloom had eaten anyway. Against another warship, it would have shrugged and kept coming. But it had not been built to take a spinal slug from a capital ship at point-blank range. Because no one builds for the day, a tug turns out to be a god. The slug went in one side, and came out the other, and kept going. And the dreadnought simply came apart along the line the slug had drawn, folding open like a book dropped in water. The fungal cord that the bloom had grown through every corridor of it caught fire all at once, as the air rushed out, and for a moment the dead Holveth hull burned green against the black, before it stopped being a hull at all. 1. On the bridge, nobody cheered. Iris Vane had told them not to, and they did not. But Park made a small sound, and Otto, 2 decks down, felt the ship reload her spine and knew the sound would be made again. Down in the missile collar, Bria Holt felt the first slug leave the spine through the soles of her boots, that single great dropping thud, and she understood in one cold rush everything that was about to happen. She keyed her cruise. Her voice did not shake. because 11 years of drills had drilled the shake out of it, and what she said into their ears was the thing she had said 1,000 times to empty space, and was now saying for real. Cells live. We fire on the wide ones first, the lonely ones, the ones nobody can help. We do not waste a warhead. We do not rush a reload. We are going to do this exactly the way we have always done it, and the only difference today is that the targets are going to stop existing. A breath. 11 years, you've waited to know if you were any good at this. Today, you find out. Stand by the cells. The swarm was reacting now, but reacting badly. The carrion bloom had never had to fight while surrounded. It had spent 9 victories doing the surrounding. Its instinct, its only instinct, was to spread, to envelop, to close the net. And now that instinct was killing it, because every ship that drifted outward to complete the encirclement was drifting away from cover it did not have, and toward a human warship that could throw death in any direction. The bloom tried to pull its hulls back in. But a fleet that has spread itself across a sphere cannot become a fist in a few seconds. The gaps the bloom had built into its own net, the careful spacing of a confident predator, were now 40 separate kill lanes, and the plane Hannah stood at the center of all of them, with a clear shot at every single one. Missile collar, Iris said. The wide hulls first, the ones out on the edge. They're the most alone. Let's make sure they stay that way. The cargo collar around the waist of the plane Hannah, the thing the bloom had read as a freighter's clamp, opened along its full circumference, and 60 missile cells, painted to look like rust, fired in a rolling wave. The missiles came out slow at first, the way missiles do, and then their drives lit and they were gone, a spreading fan of fire that arced out toward the isolated hulls on the rim of the swarm. The plane Hannah could not throw in every direction at once with her spine, but her missiles could go anywhere, and they went everywhere, and the bloom, spread thin and turning slow, could not cover any of them. The Sevic courier, the elegant fast one with the murdered prince's crest still bright on its flank, took 3 missiles amidships and broke in half. The Tesseract cruiser with the silver fins, the one that had gone missing 11 years ago with 900 souls, tried to turn and run, and took 2 in its drive section, and went dark and tumbling. A velour frigate, low and squat, released a great desperate cloud of spores in the direction of the plane Hannah, as if it could infect a missile, as if the roots that had eaten 9 civilizations could eat a warhead, and the warhead went through the cloud and into the frigate, and the cloud did not matter at all. 3, 4, 5. The plane Hannah did not fight the way the bright ships fought. Otto had served on the bright ships, and he knew the difference in his bones. A bright ship fights with its hull, trading hits, leaning into the punishment, winning by being tougher than the other fellow. The plane Hannah did not trade hits. The plane Hannah did not take hits at all, because the whole art of her was to be in a position where the enemy could not hit her in the first place. She had won her position before the first shot, in the long patient years of the lie, and so the battle itself was not a brawl but a harvest, the human ship reaping a field of targets that had planted themselves, one after another, in perfect rows. There was something almost gentle about the way she did it, if you did not think too hard about what was on the receiving end. No fury, no desperation, just the steady, deliberate work of a ship doing exactly what it was built to do, to an enemy that had arranged itself, with great care, to be done to. Otto, in the reactor room, watched the Count climb on his repeater, and kept his hand near the lever, feeding the great warm heart of the ship exactly what she asked for. He had drilled this. He had drilled all of it. But no drill had ever told him what it would feel like to watch a fleet that ate kings come apart because it had been too proud to take a tug seriously. It felt, he decided, like being proven right after 22 years of being walked past. There is a thing that happens to a confident enemy in the first minute after it discovers it is not the predator. It does not, at first, run. It cannot. Its whole mind is built around the certainty that it is the strong one, and that certainty does not collapse all at once. It cracks. For one terrible minute, the carrion bloom kept trying to do the things that had always worked, kept trying to spread, kept trying to surround, kept trying to harvest, because those were the only verbs it knew, and every one of them now fed it into the guns. A predator that is only ever hunted does not know how to be hunted. It has no instinct for cover, no instinct for retreat, no instinct for fear, and so for one full minute, the bloom died, doing the only things it had ever learned, and each of them killed it faster. By the time the instinct finally broke, by the time the seed ship finally stopped trying to harvest and started trying to survive, a third of its fleet was already gone. The seed ship understood, finally, what was happening to it. 3 kilometers of breathing rot at the front of the swarm, the fleet mind, the thing that had named the plane Hannah a beast of burden, sent out a cloud unlike any it had released before. It was not contempt. It was not amusement. The translator, struggling, rendered it as a single repeated chemical word, over and over, the same word the bloom had used to order its hulls to harvest. Now, now, now. But there was nothing left to do now except die in order, and the plane Hannah was happy to oblige. "Captain," Park's voice, "the seed ship is pulling its hulls toward it. All of them. It's trying to make a wall in front of itself. It's calling them home." Iris Vane looked at the picture. She saw it too. The seed ship, finally afraid, was dragging the surviving warships back toward itself, trying to gather them into a shield, a clot of dead hulls between its own 3-kilometer body and the small gray ship that was killing it. It was the right move, 8 seconds too slow. The hulls were too far out. They could not get home in time, and as they tried, they had to cross the open kill lanes to do it, strung out in a long, desperate line, presenting their flanks to the very weapon that was built to fire down a line. Otto felt the accelerator finish its charge and knew, before the order came, exactly what Iris was going to do. "Gunnery," Iris said, and her voice was almost gentle. "They're lining up for us. Spine on the lead hull in that recall line. Then the next, then the next. Walk it down the column. Let's give the seed ship a good look at what's coming for it." The plane Hannah aimed her mule-backed spine down the line of dead ships scrambling home, and fired. The slug went through the first hull, a Corin monitor, and out the back of it, and into the second, a nameless freighter the bloom had taken so long ago that no Navy remembered it, and through that too, and into a third, before its energy finally spent itself. 1 shot, 3 kills. The accelerator that could only fire in one direction had just been handed, by a panicking enemy, the one target arrangement where firing in one direction was the most efficient thing in the universe. A column, a line of ships, nose to tail, all trying to reach the same point. The bloom, in its terror, had stacked its own coffins for the convenience of the gravedigger. 6, 7, 8. The missile collar reloaded, the loading crews working the cells by hand and machine in the rhythm they had drilled until it lived in their bones, and fired again, another fan of fire arcing out to catch the hulls that had not made it into the recall line, the stragglers, the ones too damaged or too slow. A Tesseract escort, a Holveth tender, a thing so eaten by spores that it was more fungus than ship, flying on instinct alone, that took a single missile and dissolved into a spreading cloud of burning cord. A handful of the surviving hulls tried, at last, the only thing that might have worked, which was to charge. 3 of them, A Corin monitor and two of the nameless freighters broke from the dying net and drove straight at the plane Hannah, nose first, throwing aside the slow, patient logic of the bloom for the simple animal desperation of getting close, of getting roots on the hull before the guns could finish them. It was the right instinct. It was 4 minutes too late. The plane Hannah saw them come and did not flinch and did not maneuver, because she did not need to. Her missile collar came around and threw a short fan into the lead hull and broke it, and the spinal accelerator finished its charge and put a slug through the second, and the third. The last freighter got close, terribly close, close enough that the crew on the bridge could see the spore vents along its flank opening to spray, and then a single missile took it amidships at a range of less than a kilometer, and it came apart in a cloud that the plane Hannah simply flew through, untouched, her hull sealed, her crew suited, her hands clean. That was the closest any hull of the Carrion Bloom came to the human ship, less than a kilometer. It died there, and the plane Hannah did not slow down. Iris Vane had said they would take the fleet apart one place setting at a time, and that was exactly what the plane Hannah did. There was no scramble, no desperate maneuver, no clever feint. There did not need to be. The trick had already been played, days and years before this morning, when human engineers built a warship that begged to be ignored, and a captain chose to sail it to the edge of nowhere and wait. The whole battle had been won in the 11 seconds between the reactor coming hot and the Bloom understanding why. Everything after that was just arithmetic, and the plane Hannah was very good at arithmetic. Otto climbed up out of the reactor room as the count passed 20, because Iris had called for him on the all-ship, and because there are some things a chief engineer needs to see with his own eyes, and not through a repeater. He came onto the bridge and stood at the back in his grease-stained coveralls, and nobody told him to leave, and he watched the main display show the Carrion Bloom die. It was not a quick death, and it was not meant to be. Iris Vane could have ended it faster. She had chosen not to. She had chosen to walk through the swarm one ship at a time, deliberately, methodically, so that the seed ship, the mind of the whole thing, would have time to feel each of its hulls go out, one after another, the way it had felt 9 fleets go out under its roots. She was not being cruel for its own sake, she was being exact. The Carrion Bloom had to understand, completely and without any comfort, that it had brought this on itself the moment it spread thin to harvest a tug. Some lessons only land if they are slow. "Captain," Otto said quietly, from the back, "it knows now. You can see it, it knows." "It does," Iris said. She did not turn around. "Watch the clouds, Otto. The translator's still catching them. It stopped saying now, about a minute ago." "What's it saying instead?" Park answered, because Park was the one reading them, and his voice was strange. "It's asking us to stop. It's the same word the message used. Please. It's saying please." The bridge was very quiet. Otto Pell looked at the 3-kilometer body of the seed ship on the display, the thing that had eaten kings, the plague that wore the dead, the fleet mind that had named his ship a beast of burden and told it to lie still because it was easier that way. He thought about the 9 civilizations. He thought about the prince on the Sevic courier and the 900 on the Tesseract cruiser, and the Holveth Navy, building a monument to a ship that was even now burning green in the dark. He thought about the word please. "It told us to lie still," Otto said. "It said a tug doesn't get a battle, it gets harvested." Iris Vane finally turned her head, just slightly, to look at her chief engineer of 22 years. "Yes," she said, "it did." "So what do we tell it?" And Iris Vane, captain of the ugliest warship the galaxy had ever underestimated, looked back at the dying seed ship and gave the answer that 210 people aboard the plane Hannah would carry for the rest of their lives. "Tell it nothing," she said. "It didn't earn a battle either. Gunnery. Reload the spine. We're going to go say hello to the big one." The seed ship did not go quietly, but it did not go like a warship either, because it had never been one. It had been a colony transport once, a great slow hull built to carry hope between stars, and the bloom had filled it with itself until it was 3 kilometers of living rot, with a mind spread through every meter. When the plane Hannah turned her spine toward it, the seed ship did the only thing left in its nature. It tried to spread. It vented spores. Not a cloud now, but a tide. A vast, slow exhalation of every reproductive cell it had left. A fog of fungal seed kilometers across, drifting out toward the small gray ship, in a last desperate hope that what could not be fought might still be infected. This was how the bloom had always finished. When a body died, it seeded the dark around it, so that the next ship to pass, the next salvage crew, the next curious navy, would breathe in the death and carry it home and become the new swarm. The seed ship was not trying to kill the plane Hannah anymore. It had given up on that. It was trying to make sure that even in losing, it would win the long game, the way a plague always does, by getting inside whoever comes to clean up the bodies. Otto Pell knew the file on this. Everyone aboard did. It was the reason the plane Hannah had been built the way she was. "Captain," he said, "the spore tide, that's the part that matters. If even one of us breathes it, if even one suit cracks on the way home, we carry it back to a port, and the whole thing starts again somewhere new." "I know, Otto." Iris had not stopped watching the display. "That's why we never boarded anything. That's why we never salvaged. That's why a ship built to kill the bloom carries no marines and takes no trophies." She allowed herself the smallest, hardest smile. "We don't touch them. We don't go near them. We kill them from across the room, and we burn what's left, and we come home with clean hands. Engineering. Tell me about the burn." This was Otto's part. He had been waiting for it. Buried in the design of the plane Hannah, beneath the false rust and the sagging spine, was the answer to the one thing that made the carrion bloom impossible to truly finish. You could blow up the hulls all day, and every shattered piece would still carry living cord, still drift in the dark, still wait to be breathed. The only way to end a bloom for good was fire. Real fire. Total fire. And so the engineers who built the maintenance vessel, Heavy had given her, alongside her spine and her missiles, a third weapon that no freighter and almost no warship carried. A spread of incendiary lances. Not explosive, burning. Each one a long rod of a compound that ignited on contact and did not stop, that burned in vacuum, that burned through cord and hull and spore alike, and kept burning until there was nothing left to burn. The plane Hannah did not just kill the bloom. She cremated it. "The lances are hot and ready," Otto said. 16 of them. We've got more than enough to light the whole spread. Captain, here's the thing. We light the spore tide first. We burn the fog before it reaches us. Then we put the rest into the seed ship, and we don't stop until it's ash. We don't leave a piece big enough to drift." "Do it," Iris said. "All of it. Burn the tide." The plane Hannah fired her incendiary lances into the advancing fog of spores, and the fog caught. It was the most terrible and beautiful thing any of them had ever seen. The spore tide, kilometers of drifting death, ignited from the inside out as the lances burned through it, and the fire spread cell to cell, faster than the eye could follow, until the whole vast cloud was a sheet of green-white flame hanging in the dark between the two ships. A wall of burning plague that the seed ship had meant to infect the galaxy, and that was now simply burning, harmless, beautiful, gone. The fire ate the tide and reached back toward its source, climbing the thin streams of spore that still connected the cloud to the seed ship, racing back up the umbilical of its own reproduction toward the 3-kilometer body that had made it. The seed ship felt the fire coming home. It released one last cloud. Park read it, and his voice was barely a whisper. "It's still saying please." Nobody answered him. Nobody had to. Iris Vane keyed the gunnery channel one final time. Spine and lances both. Center of mass. Open it up, and then light it. We do not leave anything that drifts. Fire. The spinal accelerator of the plane Hannah fired one more time, and the slug went into the heart of the seed ship, and opened it like a wound, exposing the living mind inside to the vacuum, the spreading galleries of cord, the great pulsing knots of it, the 9 fleets of stolen memory all tangled into one dying thing. And into that wound the plane Hannah threw the rest of her incendiary lances, all of them, one after another, and the fire went inside the seed ship and found 3 kilometers of fuel waiting for it. In the missile collar, Bria Holt watched the seed ship open through her repeater and put down her headset, because there was nothing left to load, nothing left to fire, no cell on the plane Hannah that had a target anymore. Her crews stood around her in the red light of the collar room, suited, silent, staring at the small screen where the oldest fear in the galaxy was coming apart. 11 years of drills, 11 years of firing at nothing, of peeling the false rust off cells that never fired, of wondering if any of it would ever mean a thing. It had taken one morning to answer the question that had followed her for a decade. They were good at this. They were the best in the galaxy at this. And nobody would ever know, because the whole point of them was that nobody could ever know. She found she did not mind. That was the strange part. The part she would think about for years afterward. The not minding. The pride that needs no witness is the only pride that lasts. And Bria Holt had just discovered she had been carrying it the whole time. The carrion bloom burned for a long time. Long enough that the crew of the plane Hannah, 210 of them at their stations across the small gray ship, had time to watch a thing that had eaten kings turn slowly into light. Long enough that the green flame the seed ship bled when it died lit the whole bridge and turned every face the color of the fire. Otto Pell stood at the back and watched the plague that wore the dead become, at last, just one more dead thing, and then less than that, and then ash, and then nothing the dark would remember. When it was over, the Sevrek Verge was empty, except for the plane Hannah and a field of cooling debris that the incendiaries had already swept, already burned, already made safe. No drifting cord, no waiting spore, no piece big enough to carry the disease to the next port. Clean hands. Just as Iris had said. The bridge was silent for a while. Then someone, one of the young censor crew, said the count out loud, because it needed saying. 40 hulls, she said, and the seed ship. 41. All of them. We got all of them. 41. The number the carrion bloom had given the plane Hannah when it found her. Number 41, the next ship in the harvest, the small dead thing that would join the song. 41. Except the number had gone the other way. The plane Hannah was not the 41st ship the bloom would eat. The bloom was the 41st ship the plane Hannah had outlived, because the only hull still flying at the edge of the Sevrek Verge was the ugly gray one, with the now steady light, the tug, the joke, the burden, the warship no one had ever taken seriously. Until today. Corey Tan, the 19-year-old deckhand, stood at his station near the central well and did not move for a long time after the count reached 41. He had sealed his suit slow, the way Otto told him. He had stayed at his station. He had done his job, which had mostly been to stand ready in case something needed fixing fast, and nothing had, because nothing on the plane Hannah had failed. He had heard the slugs leave the spine, one after another, that dropping thud through the deck, and he had felt the missile collar fire and reload and fire again, and he had watched the count climb on the repeater from 4 to 10 to 30 to 41, and now it had stopped, because there was nothing left to count. He understood, finally, the thing Otto had promised him in the corridor. He was 19 years old and he had just helped erase the oldest fear in the galaxy, and the galaxy would never know his name, would never know any of their names, would walk past him in every inspection line for the rest of his life, exactly the way it had walked past Otto Pell. And it did not matter. That was the thing the old engineer had been trying to tell him. It did not matter, because Corey knew, and the knowing was a thing the whole bright galaxy could not take from him, a thing that was his, and theirs, and no one else's, forever. He would spend the rest of his life on ugly ships. He had decided it in that moment, watching the count hold at 41, and he never once changed his mind. Otto Pell turned away from the display before anyone could see his face do anything, and walked to the back of the bridge, and put his hand on the taped-shut panel they called Gerald, because he needed to touch something that was just a part of the ship, something small and stupid and theirs. He had been right for 22 years and nobody had believed him, and now a whole fleet had learned the lesson all at once. And the strange thing was that he did not feel triumph. He felt tired, and he felt the warm hum of the reactor through the floor, and he felt the ship around him, awake now, fully awake, no longer pretending. Otto. Iris Vane had come up beside him quietly. She did that. You all right? Light steady, Otto said. He nodded at the running light repeater on the wall, the small bulb that had blinked for 9 years, and now burned hard and white. Should I let it blink again? When we go cold? Iris looked at the light for a long moment. No, she said, leave it steady. Let the next one see it coming. She put a hand briefly on his shoulder, on the grease-stained coverall, and she let it stay there a moment. Captain to engineer. 2 people who had chosen this ugly ship on purpose, and waited 9 years to find out if they had been right. Take her cold, Otto. Bring us home. We've got a report to file, and nobody's going to believe a word of it. Otto almost smiled. They never do, he said. He went back down the spine of the plane Hannah, past the missile collar where the loading crews were already folding the false rust panels back over the spent cells, past the accelerator gallery where the great coils were spinning slowly down, past the incendiary racks, empty now, that had cremated a plague. He went to the reactor, and he put his hand on the worn smooth lever, and he eased it down, gently, the way you cool a horse after a hard run, and the great warm heart of the ship settled back toward its long, patient idle. But he did not let the light blink. That was Otto's one change, the only thing he did differently after 22 years. He reached up to the panel where the running light circuit lived, and he found the wire that some long-dead engineer had run from the reactor to the running light, the tell that read the ship's readiness in a code no enemy would ever learn, and he disconnected the blink entirely. From now on, the plane Hannah's light would burn steady whether she was hot or cold. From now on, she would look, always, like a ship that meant it. Let them wonder, Otto thought. Let the next fleet that drifts up to the ugly gray tug at the edge of nowhere look at that hard white light, and not know whether it means anything at all. Let them guess. The bloom had guessed wrong, and the bloom was ash, and the only thing left of the swarm that ate kings was a number, 41, that the plain Hannah now wore in her own log as a tally of the dead and not a place in a harvest. He finished with the wire. He closed the panel. He sat down on an old crate in the warm humming dark of the reactor room of the only ship he had ever loved, and he let himself, finally, feel it all the way through. 210 people had walked onto a warship that morning, believing they were a joke the Navy told itself, and they would walk off it that evening, knowing exactly what they were. There is a particular kind of pride that belongs only to the people the world refuses to see coming. Otto Pell had carried that pride quietly for 22 years. Now 209 others carried it too, and a galaxy that had walked past them in every inspection line was about to read a report it would not be able to believe. Up on the bridge, Iris Vane sat in her re-stitched chair and watched the debris field fall away behind them, and she did not feel the thing that captains in stories are supposed to feel. She did not feel triumph. She had read enough history to know that triumph is what you feel when you have beaten an equal, and the Carrion Bloom had never been her equal, not because the plain Hannah was so much stronger, but because the Bloom had been beaten by its own certainty long before it ever met her. You do not feel triumph over a thing that defeated itself. You feel something quieter and stranger, a kind of grim satisfaction at having been proven right, mixed with the cold understanding that the next enemy will have to be taught the same lesson all over again, from the beginning, because the lesson does not travel. That was the part that wore on her, in the quiet years at the edge of the verge. The lesson did not travel. Every species that met humanity met it certain, and every species had to be uncertain the hard way, one fleet at a time, because the certainty was not a thing you could argue a species out of. It had to be burned out of them. The Bloom had been the oldest and the proudest, and the most certain of them all. And even the Bloom had not learned from the 9 fleets it ate that pride is a kind of blindness. It had taken 41 hulls and a tug to teach it, and the Bloom had not lived to pass the lesson on. But Iris Vane intended to pass it on. That was what the report was for. That was what the steady light was for. Somewhere out there, she knew, the story would leak, the way stories always leak, and it would reach a fleet that was certain, and that fleet would pause. The pause was the only victory that lasted. Everything else was just ash. The plain Hannah turned her blunt, ugly nose toward home and began the long, slow burn back, steady light burning, reactor cooling, crew alive, hands clean. And somewhere far ahead, in ports and on stations, and in the high cold rooms where admirals read reports they did not believe, the story of what a tug did at the Severick Verge was about to begin its own long, slow journey, ship to ship and mouth to mouth, until the whole galaxy knew the thing the Carrion Bloom had learned 11 seconds too late. You do not take the human warship seriously. You only learn too late that you should have. You should understand what the Carrion Bloom was, before you decide the plain Hannah simply got lucky. The Bloom was not a fool. Your own histories, the ones your people whisper, will tell you that. For 400 years, the Bloom had been the one fear that crossed every border. It did not care about your treaties, or your borders, or your names for things. It drifted between the stars on the patient timescale of a disease, and when it found a fleet, it did not gamble. It studied, it tasted, it read the energy signatures, and the hull stresses, and the radio chatter, and only when it was certain, completely certain, did it choose how to feed. 9 civilizations had been certain they were too strong, too clever, too watchful to be harvested. 9 civilizations were now cord and ash inside dead hulls, flying as the Bloom's own hands. The Bloom did not lose. The Bloom had never lost. That was the whole reason your people had built monuments instead of fleets. So when the Bloom looked at the small gray ship at the Severick Verge and named it a tug, you must understand that this was not stupidity. This was 400 years of being right. Everything the Bloom could read said hauler. The energy signature said freighter. The hull lines said beast of burden. The blinking light said a lazy plant idling between cargo runs. The Bloom read all of it correctly, every instrument, every sign, and reached the conclusion the signs demanded, and the conclusion was wrong, because the humans had built a ship for the sole purpose of making every correct reading wrong. That is the thing your people have never understood about humanity, and it is the thing the Bloom learned 11 seconds before it died. You judge a warship by what it shows you. Humans build warships to be judged by what they hide. Every other species in the galaxy, yours included, builds its warships to look like warships. You armor the front. You paint the numbers big. You make the deadly thing look deadly. Because to you, a weapon is a statement, a thing meant to be seen so that the seeing alone wins the fight before it starts. This is sensible. This is how a sane species behaves, and it means that every warship in the galaxy can be read at a glance, weighed, measured, and either fought or fled. The Bloom had spent 400 years reading warships at a glance. It had gotten very... Humans looked at that and asked a different question. They asked, what if the deadliest thing we own looked like the least dangerous thing in the room? What if we built a god and dressed it as a beast of burden and sent it to the edge of nowhere and simply waited for someone certain of themselves to come and try to eat it? What if our trap was not a clever maneuver in the moment of battle, but a lie we told for 40 years, with paint and a blinking light and a sagging spine, a lie so patient and so complete that by the time you understood it was a lie, you had already spread your entire fleet thin to harvest a corpse that was about to stand up. The Bloom thought it was the predator. It had always been the predator. It drifted up to the plain Hannah the way it had drifted up to 9 fleets, certain, patient, almost gentle, and it spread itself wide to surround a thing it had already beaten in its own mind. And the moment it did that, the moment it committed its 40 hulls to a loose net around a fully powered human warship, the trap that had been 40 years in the building closed, and it closed not with a maneuver, but with a single pushed lever and 3 words sent across the gap. We carry warheads. You were told, perhaps, that the plain Hannah won by firepower. It did not. Its firepower was real, its spine and its missiles and its fire. But firepower was never the trick. The trick was that the Bloom arranged itself perfectly for that firepower before it knew the firepower existed. 40 isolated hulls, evenly spaced, no 2 in cover. A thin shell around a single ship that could fire in any direction and burn what it killed. The human ship did not have to be clever in the battle. The human ship had already been clever, for 40 years, in the shipyard, and the budget line, and the blinking light, and all that was left by the time the shooting started was to collect. This is the lesson, and you should carry it the way the warlords who survived other human encounters carried theirs. Do not trust the readings. When humanity is involved, the readings are the bait. Consider what it cost the Bloom to learn this. 40 hulls, each one the corpse of a navy that had also been certain. The Holveth dreadnought that a whole nation had mourned. The Sevek courier with its murdered prince. The Tesseract cruiser and its 900 lost souls. The Coran monitor and the Velawar frigate. And the dozen nameless freighters, too old to remember. 400 years of accumulated certainty. 400 years of being right about what a warship looks like, all of it gathered into one swarm, and spent in a single morning against a ship that broke the one rule the galaxy did not know could be broken. And consider this, which is the part that should keep you awake. The Bloom was the best reader of warships that had ever existed. It had eaten more fleets than your people have names for. If anything in this galaxy should have seen through the plain Hannah, it was the carrion Bloom, the patient plague that studied before it struck, and it did not see through her. It read every instrument correctly and reached the wrong conclusion, because the humans had not hidden the truth from the Bloom's instruments. They had built the truth to look, to every instrument ever made, exactly like a lie. There is a difference, and it is the difference that killed 41 hulls. a hidden weapon can be found. A weapon disguised as harmlessness cannot, because the better your instruments, the more confidently they tell you the dangerous thing is safe. Your people build better sensors every year. Understand what that means. Against humanity, every improvement to your sensors is an improvement to their disguise. The bloom's certainty was not a flaw in the bloom. It was the natural and correct result of being very, very good at reading ships, applied to a ship built specifically to punish that skill. The better you get at seeing, the blinder you become to the thing built to be unseen. That is the trap, and it has no floor, and humanity has known about it for 40 years longer than you have. Now, let me tell you what became of the ship and the man, because you will want to know, and because the knowing is part of the lesson. The plane Hannah came home to a human station called Far Tally, a grubby outpost at the edge of their space that matched the ship for ugliness. And she docked the way she always docked, slow and unremarkable, a tug coming in from a long, boring run. The dock workers who caught her lines did not know what she had done. The clerks who logged her arrival did not know. For 3 days, the only people in the galaxy who knew that 41 hulls of the Carrion Bloom had been burned to ash at the Severick Verge were 210 people aboard the ugliest ship in the human navy, and they kept it that way, because that is also how humans are. They do not announce. They file a report. Otto Pell filed his part of the report himself, in his own blunt hand, a maintenance log that read, in its entirety, for the day of the battle, reactor brought to full combat output. All weapon systems performed within tolerance, no malfunctions, running light circuit modified, per chief engineer's discretion, recommend no changes to vessel. He signed it, he went and got food, he slept 12 hours. That was Otto's account of the day he and his ship erased the oldest fear in the galaxy. Recommend no changes to vessel. Captain Iris Vane's report was longer, but only a little. It described the engagement in flat, plain terms, the spread of the swarm, the timing of the reveal, the methodical reduction of 40 isolated hulls, the cremation of the seed ship and its spore tide, the clean return, with no boarding, and no salvage, and no contamination. At the bottom, she added a single line of her own, the only thing in the whole report that was not procedure, and it is the line your own intelligence services eventually intercepted and could not stop circulating, the line that taught the galaxy more than any battle map. She wrote, "The enemy was not defeated by this ship. The enemy was defeated by its own certainty that this ship was harmless. I recommend we build more ships that look harmless. There is a story your own intelligence services tell, in the quiet rooms where they argue about humanity, about a single human warship and a swarm of 41. They tell it wrong mostly. They say the human ship was a secret superweapon, a thing of impossible power, and that is the comfortable version, because a superweapon can be matched. Build a bigger gun, a thicker hull, a faster drive, and you have answered the superweapon. The galaxy loves the superweapon version of the story because the galaxy knows how to answer it. But that is not what the plane Hannah was. The plane Hannah was not impossibly powerful. Her spine was strong but not impossible. Her missiles were good but not magic. Her fire was hot, but other ships carry fire. If the bloom had come at her in a tight fist from one direction, knowing exactly what she was, she would have had a hard and bloody fight, and she might still have won, but it would have cost her, and it would have been a battle and not a slaughter. The thing that made the morning a slaughter instead of a battle was not the ship's power. It was the 40 years of the lie, and the 11 seconds of the reveal, and the one enemy arrogant enough to spread its whole fleet thin to harvest a corpse. That is the version of the story the galaxy does not want to tell, because it cannot be answered. You cannot build a bigger gun against a lie. You cannot armor yourself against your own certainty. The only defense against the plane Hannah is to never be certain about anything you see, and a fleet that is never certain about anything it sees is a fleet that cannot make a decision, and a fleet that cannot make a decision is already beaten. Humanity found the one weapon that grows stronger the smarter its enemy is, and it dressed that weapon in rust and a blinking light, and sent it to wait at the edge of nowhere. The humans read that report in their high, cold rooms, and they did not believe it, exactly the way Otto said they would not. A tug. 41 hulls of the carrion bloom. The thing that ate kings, burned to ash by a maintenance vessel, heavy. It was not until the sensor logs were verified 3 separate ways, until the debris field at the Severick Verge was surveyed and found to be exactly what the report described, cooling ash and burned cord, and not one living spore, that the human admiralty allowed itself to understand what had happened at the edge of nowhere. And then they did the most human thing of all. They classified it. They buried the report deeper than the plain Hannah's spine, because the whole value of the trick was that nobody knew it was a trick, and the moment the galaxy learned that humans built warships disguised as garbage, every piece of human garbage drifting at the edge of every human border would become a thing to fear. So they hid it. They let the carrion bloom simply vanish from the star charts. One more mystery. A swarm that had haunted the dark for 400 years, and then one day was just gone. No announcement, no monument, no name. But you know how secrets travel. They travel ship to ship and mouth to mouth, across borders, into the high rooms of species that were never meant to hear them, until they reach a warlord at the edge of their patience, certain of their own strength, drifting up toward a small gray human ship to teach it a lesson. And that warlord pauses, and remembers a story they were not supposed to know, and turns away. That is the only monument the plain Hannah ever got, and it is the only one that mattered. It is the pause. It is the moment, somewhere out in the dark, when one of your kind looks at an ugly gray human hull with a steady white light and a sagging spine, and a blinking that no longer blinks, and feels something cold move in them, and decides not to find out. There is one more thing you should know about Captain Iris Vane, because it tells you something about humanity that the rest of this story only hints at. After the battle, after the report, after the human admiralty buried the whole affair deeper than the plain Hannah's spine, they offered Iris Vane a bright ship. A real one, the best in the fleet, with her name on the orders, and her choice of crew, and a number painted big on the side for the whole galaxy to see. It was the reward a victory like hers was supposed to earn. It was everything an officer was supposed to want. She turned it down. She asked to stay on the plain Hannah. The admirals did not understand. They asked her why. And the answer she gave them, the one that eventually reached your own intelligence services, and that they have never been able to fit into any of their models of how an enemy should think, was this. She said that a bright ship wins the fights everyone can see, and those fights are already half lost the moment they begin, because the enemy knows what it is facing. She said the ugly ship wins the fights no one knows are happening, and those fights are already half won, for the same reason. She said she had spent her whole career learning which fights were worth winning, and she had decided, finally, that the ones worth winning were the ones the galaxy would never even know had been fought. And then she went back out to the edge of the Severick Verge, in the small gray ship with the steady light, to wait for whatever came next. Your strategists should sit with that for a long time. The most successful human commander of her generation looked at fame and a bright ship, and chose, instead, to be invisible, because invisible was where the winning was. There is no answer to an enemy that would rather be underestimated than admired. You cannot beat a fighter who has decided that their greatest weapon is your contempt for them. As for the man, Otto Pell stayed aboard the plain Hannah for another 11 years, until his hands could no longer do the work his eyes still saw needed doing, and then he retired to Fartally Station and spent his last years repairing other people's machines for the price of a meal and a chair to sit in. He never told the story. Not once. The people of Fartally knew him as the old engineer who could fix anything, and would not talk about where he had served, and when they pushed him on it, which they did, he would only say that he had crewed a tug, a long time, out at the verge, and that it had been good work, and quiet, mostly, and he would let the word sit there, the way he had let the blinking light sit there for 9 years. A small dim tell that meant everything if you knew how to read it, and nothing if you did not. The crew scattered, the way crews do, over the years that followed. Some stayed on the plane Hannah until they were too old to serve. Some moved to other ships, ugly ships, always ugly ships, because a person who has served on the plane Hannah finds that bright ships make them nervous. All that armor announcing itself, all that danger out where anyone can see it and plan around it. Corey Tan, the 19-year-old who sealed his suit slow, became a chief engineer himself in time, on another nameless gray hull at another quiet edge of human space, and when his own young deckhands asked him why he had chosen such an unremarkable posting, he told them what Otto had told him, that there is a pride that belongs only to the people the galaxy refuses to see coming, and that it is worth more than any bright ship. Some of them believed him. The ones who did, stayed. The ones who did not went looking for glory, and found it, and were seen, and were planned around. Bria Holt ran missile crews for another 20 years, and never fired in anger again, because the plane Hannah was the only fight she was ever in, and that was enough. It is enough, she would say, to have been the best in the galaxy at a thing exactly once, even if the galaxy never knew. She trained a generation of loaders the way she had been trained, in the dark, in vacuum, half asleep, drilling for a morning that might never come, and she taught every one of them the things she had learned in the red light of the collar room. The pride that needs no witness is the only pride that lasts. The plane Hannah is still flying. That is the part of this you most need to understand. She was not lost. She did not die a glorious death. The human warship in this story did not fall, did not retreat, did not so much as take a scratch the crew could not buff out by the next inspection. She burned the oldest fear in the galaxy to ash, came home, filed a report, and went back out to the edge of nowhere to wait. Because that is what she was built for, and waiting is a thing humans are far more patient at than your people ever guessed. She wears the same dull gray. She has the same sagging spine, and the same fat, blunt nose, and the same cargo collar painted to look like rust. The only thing different about her is the light. It used to blink. Now it burns steady, white and hard, day and night, hot and cold. A light that means nothing, and might mean everything, and there is no instrument in the galaxy that can tell you which. If you ever find her, you will read her the way the Bloom read her. Your sensors will say hauler. Your charts will say tug. Every correct instrument you own will tell you the small gray ship is harmless, a beast of burden, a slow, soft animal that has never carried a weapon in its life, and you will be entirely certain, the way the Bloom was certain, with 400 years of being right behind you. And maybe you will remember this story, and maybe you will pause, and maybe, just maybe, you will do the one thing the Carrion Bloom could not bring itself to do. The one thing that would have saved 9 of its 40 hulls and the 3-kilometer mine that wore them. You will leave the tug alone, because somewhere on that ugly ship, in the warm humming dark beside a reactor twice the size it has any right to be, there is a worn smooth lever, and the galaxy has learned, the hard and final way, exactly what happens when a hand closes around it. The Bloom learned it in 11 seconds. Your people have had longer. Use the time. Do not drift up to the small gray ship. Do not put your roots through its hull. Do not tell it to lie still, because a tug does not get a battle. It does. The plane Hannah got 41 of them in a single morning, and every one of them belonged to someone who was certain, right up until the light stopped blinking, that they were the predator, and the human ship was the prey. The light burns steady now. It will not warn you again. Leave it alone.